pleasure to introduce Andy Delau. Andy was our ACR 2016 Wharton lecturer, and he does a fabulous talk on patient care issues, and I think we have something similar today. So without further ado, Andy Delau.
Good morning, thank you everyone. Again, my name is Andy Delau. I might walk around a little bit just because I'm short, and if I stand behind the podium, all you see is a head. And so this morning, what I'm here to talk about is what my version or take is on Practice Wisely. But it's really about remembering to put the me in medicine. So first of all, some housekeeping. My day job is I work for a company called Accurate. We are a radiation oncology company in the medical device space, specifically for tomotherapy and CyberKnife. But the cool thing about what I get to do is that it's really about focusing on patient-first innovation. In addition to that, recently I was named to the board of directors of a molecular diagnostic company called Avant Therapeutics. As you can see, I also have been working with an investment team based in Washington, D.C., as well as Beijing, China, called American Asian Cancer Centers. And what we focus on doing is building oncology centers in mainland China, as well as risk reduction facilities. But probably most important to me and the people in this room is that I also am part of the Patient Family Centered Care Committee with the American College of Radiology. So oftentimes I get asked a lot of questions. There's a lot of perceptions about me. So what I wanted to do is sort of attack those and address them head on. So the first thing is unfortunately, I'm not smart enough to be a physician, nor do I have an MBA. I'm not an investor, and I have not been diagnosed with cancer, so I'm not a cancer survivor. However, some of the things that I am a clinician. I have a clinical background in radiation oncology and medical dosimetry. I spent about the first 3 years of my career actually treating cancer patients. In addition to that, I've been an administrator. I've been everywhere from a manager, a director, executive VP for hospitals and oncology clinics across the US. Most importantly to me is that I'm a designer. I've built 2 hospitals, 6 cancer centers in the US, and I've done 25 facilities in mainland China, as well as 150 risk reduction facilities. I'm a marketer. So as I just said, I currently have a day job where I'm the Senior Director of Marketing leading the Americas for Accurate. Prior to that, the last 10 years, I worked for GE Healthcare, where I held numerous roles in the region for US and Canada marketing, as well as global positions. But the coolest thing that I am is a ruckus maker. And so my mentor, Seth Godin, who's a world famous marketer and book publisher, talks about being a ruckus maker. And it's, what do you do in your daily life to impact the people in your communities to make a difference? It's about creating a ruckus. So for me, it's really about creating a ruckus in the world of medicine, specifically at the intersection between physicians and patients. Which brings me to a really important question for everyone in this room. Why do we do the work that we do? This question was so important that in 2009, Simon Sinek gave one of the most popular TED Talks entitled The Golden Circle. If you haven't seen it, please go and watch it. Maybe not right now, though. What Simon realized was, and what he was researching, is he wanted to understand what was the difference between amazing organizations like Amazon, Google, and Apple versus everyone else. Or what made an inspiring leader inspiring. And so what he started to realize in his research was 3 different things. The first thing is what. And that is the fact that every organization can talk about what they do. It's the products and services that they produce. But as he started to uncover more of his research, he realized that only a few companies can actually talk about how they do their work. So this is the differential value prop. So think in terms of, maybe in radiology, maybe it's the fact that maybe you've got the latest and greatest spectral imaging or functional imaging. It's what differentiates you from your competitors. But what truly makes amazing leaders like Oprah Winfrey, Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, Steve Jobs inspiring, or amazing companies amazing, is that they lead with their why they do the work that they do. And this is fundamentally the cause, the belief, the fundamental purpose the sole reason why that organization exists. And so if we ask ourselves why we do the work that we do, it's not just because of the monetary gain, that's just a result. It's actually why we decided to make this choice. And so for me, I like to ask myself, why do I do this work? So yesterday actually happened to be my birthday. But more importantly, it happened to mark the 7-year anniversary of the passing of Steve Jobs, which also coincides with the 5-year anniversary of the diagnosis of my father, who had stage 4 metastatic pancreatic cancer. And I'm proud to say that 6 weeks after his diagnosis, he chose to live the rest of his life at home and he passed away quietly. So the reason why I do my work is because I want to make a profound impact in the lives of people in my community, my loved ones, and the patients that they become. But often, when I attend conferences or I do talks like this, a lot of people ask me, but Andy, why are you so passionate about radiology and pathology? And so I thought I'd dig a little bit deeper and I'd actually share the story of where I've seen the beauty and the essence of this happen. So in 2007, I had a board of directors for a 100-year-old cardiac-only hospital come to me and say, we want to get into the oncology business. Will you go ahead and develop and design an oncology service line for us? And I said, well, what are the criteria? And they said, well, what happens if we give you $25 million, 8 months, the dead of winter? Do you think you can pull this off? And again, I asked them, well, what does success look like? And they said, well, you need to be on time and on budget. You need to have advanced technology that nobody else has. And it has to be a completely different experience. I said, okay, I'll go ahead and I'll take this challenge on. So the first thing that I did is I went out and I interviewed 1,000 patients and their family members, both currently diagnosed with cancer as well as former cancer patients. And I asked them, when you hear the word cancer, what happens? What were the challenges? What were the barriers? And what was really interesting for me is that there were 2 themes that emerged. One was this concept of time. We start to hear a clock ticking in our minds. The other one was the loss of control. So this ended up being what the finished product looked like. It was a team that was centered and focused around the needs and challenges of patients. But how did I get to it? Well, I started to do research. I looked at clinical papers, I worked with my tumor registrar, and we looked at our tumor registry, and what we realized was that the median time from diagnosis to first treatment by hospital type, on average, now granted this is 2005 data because this is a 2007 project, was about 20 days. But it could be as high as 60 days if you happen to be diagnosed with lung cancer in the VA. So I thought to myself, can we change this? Can we figure out a better way to do it? And so what I did is I started to actually map out what the patient experience looks like, starting at screening, diagnosis, treatment options, follow-up. What does that look like by cancer diagnosis type? And we mapped it out. And then we wanted to understand what was the technology that was available to us, not only today, but looking out 2 to 3 years ahead. And how could we start to overlay that technology with the patient experience and the clinical workflow? And that's when the light bulb went off. That's when I had the genius. What I realized is that the biggest toll gate to expediting the patient experience was the communication process. It was the communication of a definitive diagnosis from a radiologist and a pathologist to the primary care, to the internal medicine physician, to the surgeon, to the rad-oncs, to the med-oncs. So how could I go ahead and how could I simultaneously disseminate all this information at once? And that's exactly what we did. We did it so well that I'm happy to say, not only did we figure out a way to give time and control back to patients, but we opened up with a promise. Any patient that walked through our front door, they could go from, I think I have cancer, to knowing what their treatment options were in 72 hours or less. But remember, it was only if the patient wanted to go that fast. Because it's not just about time and speed, it's about control. And so I think fundamentally we have to ask ourselves, why do we do the work that we do as radiologists? So I happen to be fortunate enough that I've got some friends that are radiologists. Some are in leadership, some work in academic medical centers, and a few others happen to work in community facilities. And what's been great is I've asked them all this question: why do you do the work that you do? Why did you choose to go into medicine? Why did you choose the world of radiology? And there's a common theme. We decided to go ahead and choose medicine and the world of radiology because we wanted to have a profound impact in the lives of the people in our community and the patients that they become. So we have to think about this. You choose medicine for a specific reason, but more importantly, the words that you use as radiologists build my world as a patient, and it determines the journey and the trajectory that I take inside of the world of medicine. But yet, very often, we don't talk about medicine. We talk about healthcare. We talk about health systems. How did this shift happen? Well, in order to understand how shifts happen, we need to think back to the 1894 and the great horse manure crisis. And so we can laugh, but this was something that was serious. So much so that in London, there was 50,000 horses. And I'm not sure if you know a lot about horses, but on average, one horse produces about 25 pounds of manure a day. So the leaders for the City of London started to realize that, oh my goodness, if we don't solve this problem, we've got a huge crisis on our hand. So they went ahead and they called their friends in New York City and said, do you realize what's going on? Do you have the same crisis? And the leaders in New York said, we've got 100,000 horses in our city, which means that they're producing 2.5 million pounds of manure on a daily basis. And they started to talk about this, and they modeled it out, and they projected it, and they said, in 50 years, the City of London is going to be buried in horse manure. And this was real. So they got together, and they had an economic summit. How are we going to solve this problem? They met for 4 days, and they couldn't come up with a solution. They continued to meet over the course of the next 3 years periodically, and they were not able to figure out a way to solve this problem. However, they didn't have to think about it, because technology and innovation solved it for them 12 years later with the introduction of the automobile. Which leads me to my next question, is what does this have to do with healthcare? So, I don't know about you, but I often try to think about who has been the biggest influence inside of healthcare. Not a lot of people can agree on this, so that means I get to pick. And who I pick is this man, Henry Ford. Now, a lot can be said about Henry Ford in his personal life, but we have to acknowledge the fact that in the Industrial Revolution, he invented the assembly line. And what the assembly line allowed him to do was mass produce automobiles by using technology. If I get the right technology and the right process put together, I can go ahead and I can mass produce vehicles. And if I start to think about quality, and I start to improve the process, I can go ahead and make a bigger, better, faster, cheaper widget. Because I've got interchangeable parts and an interchangeable process. So now all I need is interchangeable people. So where's the correlation? How does this relate back to healthcare? Well, as I said, a lot of what we talk about today is healthcare, not medicine. So from my perspective, the hospital today is representative of the industrialization of medicine. It's the medical industrial complex, what we now call healthcare. And listen, I'm guilty of this myself. I just told you, I've built cancer centers. I've led service lines. I know how to take people, process, and technology so that I can deliver the right patient at the right time for the right treatment and the right exam. I know how to do that. But if you start to think about it, it's no different than what we do in our emergency departments, primary care or internal medicine, or even the other ologists, the cardiologists, the neurologists, the nephrologists. All of the ologists are doing that. So who's truly the new Henry Ford sitting inside of the hospital? Well, it's the C-suite. It's the hospital administrators. And so if we think about it, I said radiologists have the ability to choose your words that build my world as a patient and determine my journey. So let's think about the words that we use on a daily basis inside of our practice. We hear things like productivity, RVUs, throughput, capacity utilization, days cash on hand, CG and HCAP scores. And the question that I ask everyone is what does this have to do with the practice of medicine? And the reality is absolutely nothing. It has to do with the practice of healthcare. We're choosing our words, and we're building a world of healthcare. And essentially what we've done is we've turned our greatest minds into nothing more than obedient workers that are smart enough to follow the rules, run the machines, and file the paperwork, i.e. the EMR, the PACS, the HIS, the RIS. Because what we've chosen to do is to remove the MD, the PhD, the MD, PhD, and the Master of Science from our leadership teams. And we've decided to replace them with the MBA, the BA, and we bought their BS, that they can actually go ahead and run the business of healthcare more efficiently and more effectively. Because what happens when you go into the C-suite and you ask them what they want, they tell you, I want a faster radiologist. And if we think about their choices that they make, they're even choosing the wrong symbol to represent. They're choosing the staff of caduceus, which is the patron of commerce and trade, or thievery. What does it have to do with medicine? And so this is interesting. The one that I find the most interesting is the silver tongue. How you can use your words to make the worse appear better. And the reality is that even the Army got this wrong. In 1902, they chose the same caduceus because it was all about the scale of war. It was about the war economy. No longer was it about being in the front lines and having a one-on-one conversation and a one-on-one ability to care for your patients. They needed to scale that care to get those soldiers back out there onto the war field. And so again, we have to stop and think and ask ourselves, are the words that we are using, are they building the world of healthcare, or are they building the world of medicine? Because as my friend Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does often rhyme. So again, if we think back to the great horse manure crisis of 1894, we need to realize that technology innovates and it helps us shift things. So how many people in the room have a smartphone, by a show of hands? All right. So from a patient or a consumer perspective, we need to realize that technology is accelerating a lot of these changes. So the first one is what I like to call the colossal clash. This is kind of what's happening between patients and physicians today. Because I, as a patient, can go to WebMD or Dr. Google, and I can ask them anything that I want. So no longer is the barrier to medical information getting it from a medical provider. I've got places that I can go for it. And the second thing is care anywhere. So I do a lot of traveling. And what's great for me is that I can carry all of my music. If I want to watch any movie or TV program, I can do it on my mobile phone. And if I needed a car ride to go from the airport to the hotel, I can also use my phone to do that as well. But yet, when I wake up in the morning and I don't feel well, I have to get dressed, I have to pick up the phone and make an appointment, I have to get in the car, I have to drive to the clinic or the hospital, I have to find a parking spot, and I have to walk in. Why can't I just use technology to connect me to a physician? And the fact is that I'm responsible for more of my spend. In 2006, less than 5% of the US population had to spend $1,000 or more for their deductibles. In the beginning of January of 2017, greater than 56% of the US population was spending more than $1,000 for their deductible. So I need to understand what is the value of why I'm seeing a physician or the exam that's being ordered for me. Because there's a data explosion. Whether it's the internet, social media, whether it's the EMR, the EHR, the HIS-RIS, whether it's my Fitbit, there's data all around us. But yet we're not taking that data to actually build insights or to move into prediction. And the reality is that we've got new entrants. No longer are our competitors the practice down the street. And yes, it may be the Apples, the Amazons, and the Googles, but it's also the people in a garage that understand how to use data and manipulate it in a different way that we haven't thought about. Whether it's deep learning, machine learning, or artificial intelligence, those are the things that we may not be seeing that could be impacting us. The same thing that happened in 1894 with the Great Horse Manure Crisis. Because the reality is that there is an evolution that's gone on in radiology, and it's going to continue to happen. But the important thing is in the shift. Do we continue to decide to use the words that build a world of healthcare? Or do we decide to change the words and begin to go back to the practice of medicine? Because if we go back to the practice of medicine and we think about our forefathers, Hippocrates had it right. It's truly about looking for natural cures. It's having all things in moderation. It's about seeking to prevent disease by lifestyle choices. And it's leading with ethics and integrity. And the interesting thing is that if you actually go back and you look at the original Hippocratic Oath, he got it right. I swear by Apollo the physician and by Asclepius, the gods and goddesses, making them my witness, that I will fulfill according to my ability and judgment this oath and this covenant. Because remember I said, the world of healthcare chose the wrong symbol. We, as physicians and clinicians, we know the right symbol. It's the symbol of Asclepius. Because he is, or Asclepius is, the deity associated with healing and medicinal arts. We know that the serpent represents the ambiguity that a physician deals with on a day-to-day basis. It's the difference between life and death. It's sickness and health. Maybe it's the medication administration. Is this going to be helpful or harmful? And it's all about the staff. Because as physicians, you support patients in their journey. With their interventions, you support them in helping to prevent them from falling into sickness again. So I encourage all of you to remember to practice your art, to choose medicine, because really what that is it's choosing to connect. It's choosing to remember that we're human. So I want to go through and have some group participation. So I want you to read this slide, and when I tell you to go, follow the instructions. And don't stop until I tell you to. Go. Stop. So I've done this a bunch of times over the course of the last 2.5 years. It took you guys about 5 seconds based on the timer here. And that's about average, 5 to 6 seconds. It has been longer than that. But what's interesting about it is in the 2.5 years that I've been doing this exercise, not once have I had someone in the front stand up, turn around, and ask or try and coordinate with the people on the left side of the room or the right side of the room or in the back. But yet, somehow, we figure it out. We figure out how to do the same rhythm in unison. And why is that? It's because we're human. Because we want to connect. Because people like us do things like this. Radiologists in Pennsylvania decide to go ahead and commune and get together once a year annually and share best practices and stories and insights. Because radiologists like you do things like this. Which brings me back to transitions again in the connection economy. So my mentor, Seth Godin, has defined what the connection economy is. And he states that in a world of abundance of choice and endless options, there's a premium on attention and trust. So think about this. The people in your community and the patients that they become, they've got endless options. And yet, you want their attention and trust. So how do you go about getting that? Well, before we get into the practice of it, you have to understand the transitions of our economics and the economy. And so in 1998, two economists actually went ahead and wrote a paper and had it published in the Harvard Business Review entitled The Experience Economy. And what they did is they simplified this by using the analogy of baking a birthday cake. And so it starts out with the fact that we started with an economy based on commodities. So it's the flour, it's the sugar, the butter. You go ahead, you take those ingredients, you mix it up, you can make a birthday cake. But because of the technology innovations and advances that happened, we ended up being busier at work. So there's more demands, and we had less time at home. So now we needed goods. So now for about $3.50, we can go to the grocery store and we can get a cake mix. We can come home and we can add water and oil. We can go ahead and we can make that same birthday cake. But again, we go back to work, technology advances, and we have to produce more RVUs. So now we need a service. So now I can go to Walmart or Kroger, and for $20, I can have them actually bake the birthday cake for me. But again, the economy has transitioned and evolved because of technology. We're so busy at work that no longer can we actually bake the birthday cake, but we actually have to outsource the entire birthday party. So for $125, we can go ahead and do that at Chuck E. Cheese. Now, remember, I was talking about the connection economy because there's another transition that's going on between the experience economy and the connection economy. So what does that mean to the world of radiology? So the commodities are the imaging equipment. The goods are the images. The service is the radiology report or the definitive diagnosis. The experience is what happens to me as a patient when I go through the radiology department. But in the connection economy, what happens when I actually get to sit and meet and speak to a radiologist? And what's fundamentally interesting about this is that it lines up almost perfectly with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Because the business of being human is really the business of radiology. So in economics, we have to talk about math sometimes. And so I'm not that smart, so I simplify it. So there's this thing called the value equation. And in the Industrial Revolution, we realized that value is really quality and service over costs. But in 2006, Michael Porter went ahead and he wrote a book actually defining what the value equation looks like inside of medicine. And so it's really outcomes over costs. But we have to think about this. In the connection economy, it's not Michael Porter or physicians or even myself that defines value. It's your end user. It's the patient. It's about attention and trust. So what does that equation look like from the patient's perspective? Well, in order to gain their trust, you have to have an open and transparent conversation. You need to help to manage their journey, their transitions inside the world of medicine. And you need to do it in the expected time. But that's not our expectation of time. That's the expectation of time for the patient. And so how do radiologists do this? Well, you have to ask yourself, are you the trusted node in your network? Whether it's in your practice, in your hospital, in your clinic, in your community. And if you're not, is someone in your group or practice the trusted node? Are they the person that everyone knows they can pick up the phone and call and talk to? And if the answer to both of those questions is no, then you need to be worried. Because we understand Moore's law. And Moore's law talks about processing power and that it doubles every 24 months. But now if you start to layer in the world of deep learning, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, that knowledge-based learning increases exponentially. So what does this all look like through the patient lens? So 10 years ago, one of my friends, Jason A. Wolf, the president of the Barrel Institute, actually defined patient experience. And he defines it as the sum of all interactions shaped by an organization's culture that influence patients' perceptions across the continuum of care. Now let's break this down. All interactions that I as a patient have, it influences my perceptions across my journey inside of medicine. But yet, 9 times out of 10, the words that you use in your radiology report that shape and build my world as a patient and determine my journey inside of medicine are not actually being conveyed to me by you. It's being conveyed by the primary care physician, the internal medicine doctor, maybe the oncologist, the nephrologist, the cardiologist. So they're using your words, providing value to I as the patient, and they're diminishing your value. And so you have to think about that. You have to think about that. And you have to step out and start to own your words and convey them. Because I, as the patient, I'm the one that's helping to determine some of that value. Because when I've got a question, the first thing that I do is I go to Google and I get a bunch of search results. And then I pick up my smartphone and I call my friends, my family members, I go to social media, maybe I look things up like clinical guidelines. And what I realize is with clinical guidelines, oftentimes the professional societies don't actually agree on the guidelines. So as a patient, what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to stop? Are we supposed to go left, right? Heck, I'm just going to throw my hands up and say, I don't really know. But that's when it comes back to something that I call the me equation, putting the me in medicine. What happens if you take Moore's law, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and Metcalfe's law, and you combine them, and you leverage them, so that you use your words that shape my world as a patient and help determine my journey inside of medicine. You can actually put the me in medicine and help to deliver care at the NF1. And so what's a real world example look like? Let's take the case of my father. His name is Miguel DeLeo Jr. And here's his scorecard. In 19 days, he went 14 days without a diagnosis. He had 3 imaging studies, 4 discussions on cost. He saw 7 physicians. He had 1 stent with 8 biopsies, 3 lesions. He had a scrap treatment plan, and he wasted 2 90-minute drives. And through all of this testing, there was one fundamental piece of information that no one understood, documented, or asked. And that was the fact that my father was a Marine. He was a Vietnam veteran. He served 2 tours in Vietnam, and he was exposed to Agent Orange. Now, I'm not saying that this would have changed his diagnosis or his life expectancy, but what if this would have been documented? Would they potentially have been able to catch it sooner? I don't know. But this is truly what care delivery at the NF1 means and the impact that you have. So, for those of you that saw either my Morton lecture or other lectures, you know that I've got some rules, and those happen to be what I used to call the rules of healthcare. But over the course of the last 2.5 years, in the research and the talks that I've done, I've gotten smarter. No longer are they the rules of healthcare, they're the rules of medicine. But the first 2 rules still remain the same, and they coincide with my favorite movie, Fight Club, which, if anyone's seen the movie Fight Club, what are the first 2 rules of Fight Club? Exactly, never talk about it. So the first 2 rules of medicine is that medicine begins and ends with the patient. Because the third rule is that medicine includes a physician and a team that's focused on the patient. And if you are fortunate enough to get my trust and my attention, remember that you can only focus on one patient at a time. And so when you walk into the room, please turn off all rings, dings, pings, and other things. But probably the most important to the people in this room is that as radiologists, I urge and encourage and implore you to step out of the dark and into the light, to own your words that build my world and shape and determine my journey inside of medicine. And let's be honest, technology is going to advance and continue to be great, but it should enable deeper and more meaningful connections and conversations. I know it can be done because I've done it myself. It should remove silos and complexity, and if it doesn't, you should ask yourselves, is it worth the technology? Because the last rule is all about building trust. You need to have a transparent and open conversation. You need to help to manage the transitions inside of the journey of medicine, and you need to do it on my expectation of time. And if you do that, you're providing the value to patients. So how do you go back on Monday to your practices, and how do you actually start to do this? Well, my friend Larry Joya, who actually lives in Pittsburgh, has an acronym, ABCD. Always be connecting the dots. And so my friend, Dr. Elizabeth Hawk, this is one of the ways that she does it. She devotes a significant amount of her time interfacing with patients, both in the physical as well as the digital community. And she also spends time with the residents, helping them to discover their spark and how they can connect with patients as well. Or maybe it's one of my other friends, Dr. Tomlinson, who recently on Twitter said that she wanted to go ahead and curate the most popular radiology tweet chats so she could disseminate this around her department and in her community. Or maybe it's Dr. Kemp, who's in Colorado, who recently shared this on social media as well, that she had a patient email her about a recent exam. She went back and she looked at it and she realized, based on not having all of the medical history, that she made an error. And she called the patient and she discussed it with the patient. And the patient loved it. The patient was like, wow, this is the first time I've actually spoken to a radiologist. This is amazing. Or my friend Dr. Weissman, who practices at the VA in Milwaukee, who about 8 times a day actually steps out of the radiology room to meet and greet patients, the same patients that he's going to be reading their exams later on. And he'll address any of the questions that they have. Because one of my other friends, Al, who happens to be a 9-year cancer survivor, she actually shared this on social media, that her breast radiologist texted her at 9:30 p.m. on a Saturday and said, hey, you know what? That exam you had yesterday, it's all clear. Congrats. Or my friend, Harry Job. There's another way of doing this with the radiology report. How do you simplify it to the patient's perspective? Maybe it's just saying, hey, here's a picture of me. I happen to be the radiologist that read your exam. Here's a key image. Don't worry, there's nothing to worry about. But if you've got a question, here's my number. Give me a call. Or maybe it's about the spaces that we use. How do we ensure that the physical spaces are comforting? That it actually enables a one-on-one conversation to happen? Are we ensuring the fact that patients aren't disrobed, or they have their backs exposed? Are they in their street clothes? Have we removed our white jackets? Are we introducing ourselves by first and last name? Are we making it a human interaction? So my final closing thoughts. While many of us use words that build the world of healthcare, what I ask you to start to think about is to choose the words that build the world of medicine, because it's all about patient first. Because we only have 2 gifts to give. The first is our why, that comes from the heart. Why did we choose to go into the world of medicine, and more importantly, the world of radiology? Because the second gift is time. Time is the one thing that all of us have. Once we give it, we can't get it back. We can't return it, and we can never, ever ask for more time. Because while technology will continue to innovate and be great, people are not our greatest asset. People are our only asset in the world of medicine. So with that, I thank you for your time and your attention.